Even though the War of 1812 was technically a draw, it felt a lot more like a British victory than an American victory. I mean, America failed several times to invade Canada, and also they had pretty much been getting their butts kicked for 3 years, even though the British weren't fully concentrated on the war and had other matters that were more important, as well as the fact that the British had successfully burned down Washington, D.C., the White House, and Congress and the Congressional Building. However, Americans still viewed this as a victory, even though it was technically a stalemate or even a British victory. In this other scenario, I earlier made a scenario about 2 hours ago where America would end up winning the War of 1812. In this scenario, we'll be exploring a British victory, which is actually much more likely than an American victory. For starters, the British were not actually fully concentrated on the war for the better part of 3 years. They had more important issues such as the Napoleonic Wars and stopping Napoleon. But a common misconception is that many people think that the British were in the War of 1812 to try to regain America for themselves. This is not true. And the main reason why this misconception occurs is because many people thought of the War of 1812 as a second war for independence because it was pretty much a rematch against the British. However, at the same time, the British were not really looking to retake America. That was really too much trouble for them. They were more so just looking to teach America a lesson and just keep that country in line. That was their main idea going forward with the war. And the war ended up being a draw, but like I said earlier, a British victory would be much more likely than an American victory. The reasons why the war even started to begin with was because the British had begun policies such as trying to make Native Americans insurrect against the Americans. They had promoted Native American insurrections, and they had also impressed American soldiers by basically kidnapping them and forcing them onto British ships. They also had blocked harbors and only allowed American ships to enter if they had paid taxes, which was completely, bad, given the fact that America is its own independent country, not a British colony anymore. The British were more focused on defeating Napoleon, so they didn't really try in the war until 3 years later after Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. So in this new scenario, we're going to assume that Napoleon never retakes control, and he never escapes from that island, and he stays there. And if that's the case, then the British can actually concentrate on America much earlier in 1813 instead of 1815. Focusing on the war 2 years ahead would have given the British a big advantage, and they probably would have been able to burn the White House and succeed in winning the war. The British victory would definitely hurt American morale and would actually cause a few territory losses for the Americans, especially in New England, near New York, as well as Maine. This would overall also cause American morale to severely dip. Many Native American tribes also in the Midwest, such as Tecumseh's Confederacy and his alliance of Native Americans, would have also had assurances in a treaty between the British and the Americans that the Americans would not expand west and try to take over their land. Plus, Tecumseh and the Native Americans would be given several land rights, and it is even possible that they could organize into their own state. The 5 civilized tribes in the South would also have most likely not been pushed out because in this scenario, there is no Indian Removal Act, and it is actually possible that Native American uprisings in the South would have become even more serious. Also, a conflict, even though the treaty would have still existed, it's unlikely that America would have upheld their end of the bargain for long. After most likely a decade or so, America would have eventually have to have tried to expand westward and militarily force the Native Americans to leave. And eventually, sooner or later, America would come out on top. It was inevitable. America had much more population than the Native Americans did, and it's inevitable that they would have been pushed out west, even though it probably would have been delayed by about a couple decades or so. Another major influence of the British winning the War of 1812 is that worldwide, America does not gain as much respect as it does in our scenario. The Spanish would probably not even consider giving away Florida to the Americans, and Florida would likely stay under the control of the Spanish, and eventually, when Spain's colonies, eventually sooner or later, Florida may even become its own independent country in the South. Texas also would remain in Spain and would also transfer later to Mexico, and the Spanish would not allow an American colony to be set up in Texas. So therefore, Texas plus all of the rest of the Southwest would still remain with Mexico once Mexico gains independence from Texas, which means all of that area would still remain with Mexico. At the end of the day, also, British Oregon and much of the Hudson Valley would still remain in American control, in British control, and would never be transferred over to the Americans because, first of all, the British won the War of 1812, so they would have no reason to even consider negotiating with the Americans or trade away any more territory. As a result, the furthest American expansion would most likely be the Great Plains and a few of the Rocky Mountain states. The Civil War would still occur because it was at the end of the day inevitable as long as America would have slavery. Therefore, the Civil War would probably actually be delayed much longer, maybe by 3 decades or so, because of the issues of Native American, because of the issue of the Native Americans and the American military seeking to force them out, as well as the fact that without as much expansion, the Civil War would not have gained traction until roughly about possibly even the early 1900s. So the Civil War would have still happened, except much later, possibly at the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. At the end of the day, we'll probably end up with an American map that looks like this. Keep in mind, this map still has Florida under American control. Florida would probably be under Spanish control, or it would be its own independent country in present-day America. So ultimately, the end result is that America loses prestige globally and is probably not even the global superpower we know today, because expansion and manifest destiny is what caused America to become a superpower globally. However, without manifest destiny, America would inevitably become really just like a minor power. Probably it would have like the same amount of power as a country like Italy would. It would really just be a regional power, to say the least, right now. So, and it would have much less territory. So at the end of the day, this is what would happen if the British would win the War of 1812. Thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel.